Good morning on this first day of March and welcome to the Georgia Gang. Georgia officials prepare for a what-if scenario when it comes to the coronavirus. An I-team investigation about Georgia's lieutenant governor and his interactions with a state vendor. And the effort to ban lying under the Gold Dome. Darren, Phil, and Kathy are all here. Martha Zoller is back, filling in for Janelle this week. The debate and discussion begin right now.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia Gang starts now.
Governor Brian Kemp announced this week the state will be ready for whatever comes regarding the coronavirus. The governor says he's had calls with the president's team and is keeping in close contact with the state's public health officials. At Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, about 1,000 people have been screened. 200 travelers agreed to do a home quarantine.
Have been put into self-quarantine at their home here in Atlanta. And with that, the CDC checks up on them and their temperature is taken and reported to the CDC every day for 14 days.
Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport General Manager says all screenings for the coronavirus have been orderly and effective. He says the airport has enough medical and customer service staff to handle expanding checks as people continue to fly in from all over the world. The CEO of the Atlanta Convention and Visitors Bureau says while other cities have seen conventions cancel due to fears over the virus, so far it's business as usual with 22 planned conventions this year.
There's been no material effect on our business to date. So for us, it's business as usual.
But Georgia is no doubt feeling the effects without one case reported here in the state. And let's start with you, Phil. I mean, the impact already on the ports.
Well, that's right. I am a big fan, though, I have to say, of the Centers for Disease Control. I don't know if all of you have done the tour, but I recommend it. These are the top experts in the world. In fact, the world comes to the CDC. I think they're in lockstep with President Trump and his team. I feel good about the fact that so far so good in Georgia, but to your point on the economic impact, I did read somewhere where it takes about 30 days if you're talking about China with regard to the pipeline and when things are coming into our shores. So we aren't feeling the full effects yet. And it's really hard to predict. One thing I will say, there's exceptions, but a lot of these pundits and politicians really don't know the issues. I think that if you're a journalist, talk to the experts.
Darren, Phil mentioned the CDC this week, and they kind of had a dire warning saying it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. There are outbreaks all over the United States. So it's a fine line for public officials here in Georgia. You don't want to cause a panic, especially, Governor Kemp, who says, they've got a handle on it. But you also want folks to be prepared. How do they handle that?
Well, that's going to be a very tough balance. And what the governor said is he's communicating with the federal government, he's communicating with the president, and he's also communicating with the CDC. And so while we should not panic, we should take this very seriously. But also, we as citizens, there are some precautionary things that we can do. I mean, we can wash our hands, we can make sure we use hand sanitizer. And if you're sick, try to stay at home. If you have to be out, reduce the amount of people that you interact with. And so what really was alarming to me is the not if, it's when. And I do think that we've got to make sure that the government is doing their job, that they're all talking. And I was very happy to see that the governor, again, got out in front of this and really showed that he was working with the local officials to make sure that we were prepared.
But Martha, we are in the midst of state budget cuts, hospital closings in rural Georgia. How prepared can Georgia be with these budget cuts?
Well, I think that will be something we'll see. I mean, the supplemental budget hasn't been passed yet, and we've got the big budget that has to be passed after that. And I'm expecting that you're going to see more money spent on public health. Now, just to be very clear on the federal level, while the president did ask for cuts to the CDC in the last couple of budgets, they didn't happen. So CDC got full funding that they had asked for from the budgets that were ultimately signed.
Kathy, should the legislature put some money aside, in the case of a corona outbreak here in Georgia?
Yeah, absolutely, because it really is not a case of whether, it's when. And the original budget that the governor put forward had $15 million in cuts in public health, and in the refusal to expand Medicaid, so we have people fully funded in our hospitals getting compensated. We had 3 rural hospital closure announcements in the last month. This is what happens when you sort of strip things down to the bone. Then when you have an emergency, you're going to have a lag before you can be ready.
Well, and the good news is I think that we are prepared in many ways in how to do this. And what Richard Woods has done with the schools, where they have nurses in all the schools again, that in some of these rural areas where they may have hospitals have closed, there's still interaction with healthcare professionals that's happening in places that are very rural. So that's a positive thing. And I think that what we have to make sure is that the information that people are spreading around, unlike the coronavirus, is the accurate information.
Good point. Good point. Well, I want to turn now to Senate race, what we call Senate race number 2 here in Georgia. DeKalb CEO Michael Thurmond says thanks, but no thanks. So Theron, you're close to him. Let's weigh in on his decision. And then he announces that he's going to endorse Michael Bloomberg for president.
Well, it was a really good week for the CEO. He said no to the U.S. Senate race. He said yes to DeKalb. And what we've always said, and he said it publicly, is that he loves his job as CEO, and he wanted to stay there to finish a lot of the things that he set for, which is repairing the sewer system. I mean, he's investing millions and millions of dollars. You hear residents there saying, hey, finally someone is really taking this issue seriously. And I think also, I'll be honest with you, Lori, I mean, I think he was sort of concerned about the climate and the thing that he cannot control that's kind of going on in the presidential scene and who will be at the top of the ticket. Remember, he's a moderate, and so he wanted to run as a moderate. But the good news is that I think the DeKalb County residents can know that he's fully committed to re-election, and I think he's still got a bright future in Georgia politics.
Kathy, did Michael Thurmond do Democrats a big favor here? You've got 3 Democrats running in that race to unseat Kelly Loeffler, Ed Tarver of Augusta, Matt Lieberman. So, and Raphael Warnock, of course, and he's considered the front runner. He's got the backing of Stacey Abrams. So, did he help the Democrats in this race?
I think he helped himself, and I mean it in a good way. I think DeKalb County, he's the best CEO we've had in DeKalb County in decades. So having him not be there would be a big loss for people in DeKalb County, and it would have been a difficult race for anybody to negotiate. It's not a race anybody should want to be in, because you're going to have to run for election about 62 times in the next 12 months, and that's no fun.
That's an understatement,
yeah.
I think. Martha, we'll turn to Republicans now, because I'm so glad you're here.
Thank
because you ran
think.
against Congressman Doug Collins back in 2012 for Congress. So give us your perspective here. I mean, it is a nasty fight already. And it's not necessarily Kelly Loeffler, it's kind of Kelly Loeffler's groups that she's tied to that are kind of doing the nastiness. But, how bad is this going to get for Republicans?
Well, I mean, it feels a little bit like deja vu all over again, because in many ways, Doug is kind of in the place that I was when I was challenging him, in that I had all the conservative organizations supporting me, all the big third-party verifiers that were in the conservative movement that were supporting me. I had the Better Name ID. I remember my consultant saying they had never seen someone with the level of name ID that I had lose, and I can now handle that. So I think in many ways, I can relate to what Doug is going through right now, because he's kind of fighting the machine at this point in time. But I have to be fair in saying that I was an early supporter of Kelly Loeffler. I feel very strongly about this is not about flipping Democrats. This is about getting back Republicans that we've lost, and I think she's a person that can do that. But it's going to be a very nasty race, and it's qualifying's next week, and we'll know what the field is going to look like by then.
Phil, weigh in on this.
Well, we've got one last shot for President Trump to go with Plan B and see if
Plan C, I heard.
Plan C, or maybe D. We're working on that. But if Doug would take a position that he would like, but if that's not going to happen, I always say the good news is that come January, because of the math, there will be a runoff in January 2021, and it'll be a good conservative Republican. Either one of them, I'm not worried about in their voting record. But I did see a survey, I think I cited it last week, where a lot of Republicans, I think it was 40%, said they had not made up their mind yet between Senator Loeffler and Doug Collins. So it'll be close on that split.
And it's early, so we'll see. Well, coming up, we discuss the results of a Fox 5 I-Team investigation involving the Lieutenant Governor and his relationship with a state vendor. Stay tuned.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Email them at georgiagang@foxtv.com.
Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan is under scrutiny for his ties to a state vendor that has a $14 million contract with the state. Phil, do you want to explain this one and give us your perspective?
Well, this was a shocker when Dale Russell did his investigative report for our I-team here. And, you know, I think we all are in favor of transparency here. And certainly it was transparency that suffered. It was bad judgment. Why are you doing business with the state when you're a state official? And then you had the report come out that the Lieutenant Governor was getting tickets and some other fun stuff, a trip to a luxury ranch, and not until our reporter Dale Russell was making the inquiries did finally the Lieutenant Governor's office fess up and say, yes, this happened. So, I mean, obviously an ethical lapse. Has he learned from it? And from a PR perspective, it was horrible because you had different conflicting statements that were put out in the press this past week.
Martha, as a fellow Republican, Jeff Duncan, of course, a Republican, weigh in on this. Like, what are the optics here?
Well, initially the optics aren't good, but I think that in this kind of world we live in where stories come after stories, it just all depends on what the stories are that come after this, right? I think that it's not quite as negative as Phil is painting it because he has taken some action, even though it might have been after the fact. I don't believe that Lieutenant Governor Duncan intentionally tried to mislead people. However, the optics aren't good right now, and he'll have to get through this like a lot of elected officials do. And it depends on the stories that come after.
And Theron, you know, we've been hard on elected officials, especially in the city of Atlanta.
Yeah, DeKalb and Democrats.
And
City Hall of Atlanta.
Yeah.
So weigh in on this.
No, listen, I agree with Phil and Martha that the optics are definitely not good. The one thing that I would add as a footnote is that the Lieutenant Governor did pay back the money for the courtside Atlanta Hawks tickets that he received. And I think the other thing is that, you know, this is just the climate that we're in right now, where you have previous relationships before you become elected with people who run successful companies who are vendors. And I think therein lies where it was the transparency need, where once you knew that this person had a $14 million contract with the state. But I agree with Phil and Martha also. I don't think Lieutenant Governor, based on what we know in his service, didn't intentionally go out to try to do anything unethical. And so to your point, Martha, I'm hearing a lot of rumors that there are more and more stories that are going to come out in the next few months, and so he better be prepared to answer those stories and try to be as transparent as he can.
Kathy?
You know, I have to disagree a little bit there, Theron, because when you get elected, you understand that there are certain things that you can't do. To think for a minute that somebody's not going to look twice of you flying on a private jet with somebody who does business with the state to Montana for a week is just ludicrous. And if it, you know, and if you really didn't think that that was wrong, you're probably not fit for the job. And I personally am just getting really tired of people getting elected and then trying to put together the puzzle of how they're going to make a living. That's something you got to think on the front end. It is very difficult. But once you get there, that doesn't justify moves of desperation to try to fix it.
And those are all fair points. And again, I want to be fair, and I don't disagree with what you said. But I think what I'm saying is that, but before the Lieutenant Governor became the Lieutenant Governor, he has money, and he had money. I think it was an idea around an app that he wanted to present to this state vendor. And I think that the line was, and I'm just going to do a little shameless plug here, that's why you hire someone at Paramount Consulting Group or other places to really be that go-between to say, hey, we have this great idea. I know you guys have a personal relationship. Let that person present the idea. And if it's a go, it's a go. But I don't even think that they actually went forward with it. But to your point, it was the actual communication, the flying around the plane. I think he stayed at the ranch for past 5 days, and the Hawks tickets, and so it definitely doesn't look good.
Well, it seems that there is a pattern here of stories about private jets, and we are in this area where, on the one hand, it seems that Georgia likes the idea of people that come out of the business side, and they're electing those kind of folks. On the other hand, people are trying to criticize kind of the trappings that come along with that. And so I think that, to your point, you've got to think about these things ahead of time. How are you going to make a living if you're doing that? And I think that, again, it all depends on what comes after this, whether this just rolls down and it's a footnote or if there's more.
Well, there's also a reporting thing, too. There was no reporting of these tickets and some of these other luxury items. And then the reporter calls and all of a sudden, there's reporting. So that is a staff problem, in my opinion.
All right, we're going to move on. This is a big week for Georgia's new voting machines as early voters head to the polls to cast ballots in Georgia's presidential primary. Kathy, we have a record number of registered voters now here in Georgia, 7.2 million. And counties have been running tests and mock elections. So the big question is, are we ready?
Well, we'll find out soon enough.
Yes,
We're going to find out in about 2 weeks whether, the planning that's gone into this has been sufficient. And I think that there's lots of things that we've seen in sort of the trials along the way that if people aren't trained, if there's not sort of the electrical load capability, if we don't have good protection for people's privacy when they vote, we're going to have some significant challenges.
Phil, do you think the Secretary of State has handled this whole rollout well?
I think it's gone very well. There were some initial stumbles. We had a lot of lawsuits, as we know. In fact, just this past week, a judge ruled that there is enough privacy, and if people are trying to look at screens, turn the screens around away from where people can see them. So I think the instructions have been given to all 159 counties. I always try to emphasize for viewers that the Secretary of State only has so much power here. Power rests with the Board of Elections of all of the counties.
And at that point, really quickly, I do think that the Secretary of State has made a valid effort to coordinate with the public. You and I have been out, across the state where we've seen people from his office come and talk about the new voting machines. I would encourage the Secretary of State to do more with coordination with the local county officials, and he should be asking for some funding in the budget. I know there's a lot of negotiations going on, but the one thing you don't want is to say, I did not have enough funding to give, the local governments enough to prevent whatever problem may happen.
That's a good point, because we've had a shortage of machines in various counties.
Martha, weigh in, last word.
There has been training as far as the local offices on how to handle that. And I suggested to people, hey, early voting starts next week. If you haven't seen the machine, you're uncomfortable with the machine, get out there early so that you have an opportunity.
Good advice. Well, coming up, state lawmakers want the truth and nothing but the truth. We'll discuss next.
Join the discussion on the Georgia Gang Facebook page and watch past episodes on the Georgia Gang YouTube channel.
I can't wait to discuss this one. Republican State Senator Jeff Mollis is pushing a measure that would, quote, most strongly request witnesses coming before Senate committees tell the truth. Violators could be cited for contempt and barred from giving testimony. Lawmakers, of course, are excluded on this one. So, Kathy, in this world of fake news, how is this enforceable under the First Amendment?
Well, when we were talking about this, I think a bar of soap to wash their mouths out might be good to put into the legislation. Again, I just feel like sometimes the wheels have come off the car, that some of the just really basic fundamentals of just good behavior are lost now in elected officials and also people who represent them down at the Capitol. And I'm sorry he has to do it. It sort of makes us look foolish, but maybe it's a good point to make.
But Phil, his point was these witnesses come forward giving false information, and they're doing legislation based on what some of these witnesses are saying.
Well, that's why you cross-examine these people. I want to know who lied to Jeff Mollis and how he got all mad, but I think this is ridiculous. You can have strong opinions, and is it a lie? No, it's your opinion, and hopefully it's based on facts, but if not, that's why you have lawmakers at these hearings to question people.
Well, I would say this, Senator Jeff Mollis is the chairman of, I think, the most powerful committee in the Senate, which is the Rules Committee, and I think that knowing Senator Mollis the way that I do, and I think, Kathy, you work with him, all of us work with him, I don't think he's trying to take away a person's First Amendment right. He's just not built that way. I think what he's implying is to really send a strong message to people who testify that, make sure that you're factual, make sure that you're being honest. But I do agree with Phil. I do think that it's up to legislators to do more cross-examination and to gather facts. But let's be honest, a lot of these legislators, they depend on outside organizations, outside lobbyists and individuals to help them get through complicated issues. And so while I do think that Senator Mollis, his heart's in the right place on this, it is going to spark some controversy, but trying to tell people that they can't come and express their First Amendment right and accuse them as liars and how you enforce it.
Let's hook them up to lie detectors.
Well,
he's going to have to work on that.
I like how Theron said, let's be honest.
That won't work.
All right, Republican State Senator Burt Reeves introduced the much anticipated sports betting legislation this week that would not require voters to decide the issue. Now, this has the backing of major sports teams, but does it have the backing of a majority of lawmakers?
By the way, it was Burt Jones.
Oh, sorry. You're right, Burt Jones.
Oh, your good friend Burt Jones.
Yes.
Yeah.
Are you supporting that?
I would tell you this. I think that at the Capitol, and I know you can weigh in here, it's definitely been talked about a lot. I mean, it was at the forefront in the beginning of the session. With all the different budget conversations going on, with a huge push now from a lot of lobbyists around gaming, I don't know if it's really at the top of the queue as far as prioritization right now. It's going to take someone like Speaker Ralston or Lieutenant Governor Duncan or someone that's very powerful within the Senate caucuses to say, hey, we want to move this.
Well, I disagree with Theron. It is in the queue, and we're talking about getting new revenue sources, and you and I have talked about, all of us have talked about it on the gang with regard to not just the sports betting, which is going on in other states, and other legislatures are legalizing it because of a Supreme Court decision. But I think you'll see, and you're already seeing the talk now for pari-mutuel local option sports, horse racing. You're also seeing the destination resort gambling. Will it be tied together? That's also a discussion that's going on right now in the Gold Dome. I think this is it's another revenue producer. I think we ought to get in line with other legislatures.
Kathy, weigh in, and then we'll go to Martha.
Well, I don't think that the members of the General Assembly are going to want to be the ones who vote to say yes on this. I don't think they're going to take the option of this away from citizens in an election year. It won't play well in Republican primaries, quite frankly, and I'm not sure to play that well in Democratic primaries.
I think the polling does well in Republican primaries. Now, I think the people should have the right to vote on these. If you're going to expand gambling, I believe the people ought to have a right to vote.
Martha, do you think we'll see a constitutional amendment?
I think it has to be a constitutional amendment. I tend to agree with Kathy on this, that, I think a lot of lawmakers, I don't think you'll get the numbers you need on lawmakers, and I think that they're going to punt and have it on a constitutional amendment if they do anything.
All right. Well, we will see. And coming up, we will have winners and losers. Stay tuned, everyone.
Time now for the week's winners and losers.
All right. Today, we will start with Theron.
Thank you, Lori. All right, my first winner is going to be Katherine Johnson, who was a NASA mathematician who passed away last week at the age of 101. Also want to give a big shout out to Sheila and Horace Durden. I met Horace at the Hawks game this week, and he said they watch the show every Sunday, and definitely want to celebrate them on 34 years of marriage. Also, Kay Husbands-Filling, who was just named the Dean of Ivan Allen College of Liberal Arts at Georgia Tech. She's a wonderful person, and wish her the best. And then lastly, on a sadder note, we lost senior judge Barbara Harris, who had been a senior judge at the City of Atlanta for a long time, had recently retired a few years ago, was a co-founder of the Georgia Association of Black Women Attorneys, and everyone in the city and everyone in the legal community is going to miss her, so I definitely want to express my condolences to her family.
That was tragic. Okay, Phil.
Well, I've got a winner. He's the mayor of Dallas over in Paulding County, and that's Boyd Austin, and he's been serving for 25 years, did a great job, good public servant. He's now shifting to an open state Senate race, District 31 over there, so he's a good conservative Republican, so he's my winner. And yeah, I've got a winner. The town of Juliet is having an issue with contaminated water, and there's a riverkeeper organization that's been saying, hey, we need some testing. They did their own testing but won't disclose who did the test, which kind of throws cold water on that, if I may say so. I think the losers are the citizens, though, of Juliet that are getting misinformation, and I do want to make a winner. Will Davis, he's the editor of the Monroe County Reporter. He's been doing some good columns and reporting, and hopefully they'll have an independent test that can actually tell the people what's going on and how can we fix it.
They were active at the state capitol.
They were at the state capitol the other day.
All right, Martha.
My winner this week is Pete Spriggs. He's the longtime program director for WSB Radio, and he managed talent at WSB for a very long time and brought a lot of the voices that we hear and we count on to the radio. So he's my winner for the week, retired after many, many years. And then my loser is that in all this talk about whether it's coronavirus or whatever it is, we always talk about adding more money to the budget. We never talk about where we can actually cut on the federal level or on the state level. We have to have that whole discussion on the table. It's my issue that I talk about all the time, and if we don't do it, we're not going to be able to solve the problems we need to do. So my loser is the discussion and the noise around all of this.
And the lack of a solution right now.
That's right. That's right.
Kathy.
I guess my winner this week is Councilmember Antonio Brown in the Atlanta City Council for renaming a portion of Griffin Street after former council member Ivory Young, who passed away last year. He was very passionate about his district and his street, and I think it's fitting that we name that after him. And I think the losers are the taxpayers in the city of Atlanta, who in the new Atlanta Regional Commission transportation plan are seeing about $500 million sort of siphoned off of what they thought were going to go into transportation improvements in the city and moving them into a fund for the next 20 years for a project at Emory that may never happen.
All right, we have a little extra time, so I'm going to go back to Theron because you're saying pick me.
And this is a problem. I forgot to mention that the winner also is MARTA in DeKalb County. MARTA announced that they gave $250 million to DeKalb County. They're going to add 350 new bus shelters, amenities, and rehabilitation of all stations in DeKalb. So that was a really big thing that I know that the entire commission and the CEO was working in conjunction with MARTA for a long time.
And one thing that we didn't get to discuss, but if you could weigh in quickly, just DeKalb County CEO Mike Thurman endorsing Mike Bloomberg for president.
He endorsed Mike Bloomberg on Friday, and this is a big endorsement for the Bloomberg campaign because many would say that besides Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms, Michael Thurman is as prominent as the
And Michael's
mayor.
not a socialist,
Well,
so
he's not.
He didn't want to go with Bernie Sanders.
Well, that's your words, not my words. But it's a big endorsement, and he definitely is going to be out in front all across the state trying to ensure a Bloomberg victory in Georgia.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Martha, for filling in for Janelle.
Having me back.
Yes, we'll see you again soon. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in. We will see you again next week. Bye-bye.
The opinions expressed in this broadcast are those of the panelists appearing in this program.